All right, so test is Tuesday on P1 through P5. I picked certain questions from the test review to go over, so I'll do those kind of first, but if you have questions or questions on something related to what we're going over, you can ask. I'll do another one if you want to see another. So first question I picked is number 5. So it says find all the solutions of the equation. How would we solve here when we have square roots? What should we do first? Kylie. Awesome. We always want to isolate the square root first. So we're going to add 8 to move it to the other side. So we have the square root of 48 minus x is equal to 8. And then to get rid of the square root, we're going to square both sides. So 48 minus x is equal to 64. And then we just solve from here. Subtract 48. So negative x is equal to 16. And then divide by negative 1. So x is negative 16. Whenever you have square roots, you want to check just to make sure it works out. So here we have 48 minus negative 16 would be 64. Square root of 64 is 8, minus 8 is 0, so it works. So when you have fractions, typically when you have an x outside of the square root or outside of the fraction, you definitely want to check, but it doesn't hurt to check with something like this. So here we want to solve. I'm going to rewrite my exponent as a square root and an exponent since it's a fraction. So the number on top is the exponent. The number on the bottom is the index. So the index is in front of our square root. So we have the cubed root of x plus 7 squared. The number on top stays on top is equal to 125. Now what would we do next to solve? Kylie.
We do it like the opposite, so it gets like the 3 over like 2 power, and then we do that to that other side.
That works. Instead of breaking it up like we just did, you could always just raise the right side, so 125 to the 3 over 2 power. But if we do it in separate steps, we'd want to take the square root first to cancel out with the squared. What do I have to remember whenever I take the square root of both sides? Plus or minus. So we have plus or minus. Square root of 125 would be 5 square root 5. So then I still have the cubed root of x plus 7. To get rid of the cubed root, I'm going to cube both sides. So x plus 7 is equal to, here we got to be careful. If you need to write it out, but we have 5 cubed and then the square root of 5 cubed. That gets distributed to both. It's still going to be plus or minus because if it was negative and cubed, it ends up being negative. If it's positive cubed, it ends up being positive. So we're going to keep that plus or minus sign there. 5 cubed would be 125. Now the square root of 5 cubed, we have 3 of them. Square root of 5 times 5 times 5. So this comes out to be a whole number 5 and a square root 5. So 125 times 5 would be 625. Square root 5. And then last step, we're going to subtract the 7. So x is equal to negative 7 plus or minus 625 square root 5. All right, next, let's look at 9. What should we do first for 9? Awesome. We're going to take out our GCF, which is x minus 4 to the 1/2 power. We've done so many of these at this point. So So x minus 4 to the 1/2 power is our GCF. When we take that out, we're left with 4x plus 3 times x minus 4. We got to simplify the inside so we can distribute the 3. So we get 4x plus 3x minus 12. So 7x minus 12. Yes.
So is the GCF x minus 4 raised to the 1?
Yes. From here, these are our factors, so we can set them both equal to 0. So x minus 4 to the 1/2 power equals 0, and 7x minus 12 equals 0. So when we divide out that 1/2 power, so we are taking away x minus 4 to the 1/2 power. When we divide it out, we subtract the fractions. So 3 over 2 minus 1/2 would be 2 over 2, which is just 1. So that's how we get the x minus 4 on the inside, because it's x minus 4 to the power of 1. To solve our first fraction, or our first factor here, we want to square both sides. 0 squared is still just 0. So x minus 4 equals 0. We get x is equal to 4. With the second one, we get x is equal to 12 over 7. Now we have to be careful here, because I started with x minus 4 to the 1/2 power. 1/2 power is the same thing as saying the square root of x minus 4. So x cannot be, or it has to be greater than or equal to 4 in order to be in our domain. Is 12 over 7 greater than 4? No, it's like 1, almost 2-ish. Right? 7 goes into 12 one time with a little bit left over. So it's not 4. So this does not work as an answer. It's not in our domain. So our only answer here would be 4. So you always want to be careful if you have the 1/2 power or the 1/4 power. So exponent of 1/2. Or 1/4 or 1/6, anything with an even index, you need to be careful because we can't have negatives under the square root or under the 4th root. I'll say can't have negatives. If it was the 1/3 power, that's fine. You can have negatives, bless you. You can take the square root or the cubed root of -8. This is okay. But you can't take the square root of -8. That is an imaginary number. Doesn't work. So if it was the 1/3 power or the 1/5 power, that's fine. It just can't be an even index with a negative on the inside of your parentheses. So the cubed root, because we could have -2 times -2 times -2, which gives us -8. But the square root doesn't work because you can't have 2 of the same number that gives you a negative. So number 12 doesn't really look like a lot of math, but we do have to be careful when we have an absolute value and an inequality. So when you have an absolute value and an inequality, if it's less than, it's just one thing. Whatever's in your middle or your absolute value stays in the middle, and we just put 2 less than signs. So this we have -6 is less than x, which is less than 6. If you're uncertain if it's this one or the other one that we'll do, which will go to the, I think 13 is the next one that we are going to do that's greater than, always pick a number and test it out. If your if your inequalities went the other way and you thought it might be outside of -6 and +6, plug in 7. 7 doesn't work, so it's got to be inside. So always think about it because it's got to make sense. But if it's less than, you're going to put whatever's in your absolute value in between your two less than signs. Next, let's look at 13. So here this is an absolute value that's greater than. So absolute value, when we split it up, if it's greater, it's going to be one or the other. So we got to split it up into 2. So we keep the first one the same. We just get rid of the absolute value. So x over 6 is greater than 1. The other one, we switch the sign and make it negative. So x over 6 is less than -1. Then we just solve both of these. So multiply both sides by 6. So x is greater than 6, and x is less than -6. So if we put these on a number line, we've got -6 and 6. If x is greater than 6, we're talking about numbers bigger than 6. If x is less than -6, we're talking about numbers less than. So it'd be from -infinity to -6. And from 6 to infinity. So 17, we have a rational inequality. We always want to get our fraction to be either less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, whatever it may be, but 0 on the other side. So if we start with a fraction, we need the right side to be 0. So here I got to move the 2 over and combine it together. So I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. So 5x plus, 5 plus 3x over 1 plus 2x minus 2 is less than or equal to 0. What do we need if we're adding or subtracting with fractions here? Common denominator. So I'm going to make my common denominator 1 plus 2x. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom here by 1 plus 2x. So on top, I have 5 plus 3x. I'm going to distribute the -2, so I'm going to kind of do 2 steps in one here. So -2 minus 4x over, and then on the bottom we have 1 plus 2x. And then we can do some simplifying. On top we have 3 minus x over 1 plus 2x. It's less than or equal to 0. From here, what would we do? Awesome. Make the bottom not equal to 0. And what about the top? Make the top equal to 0. Perfect. So we want to find our key numbers. So here, x equals 3, and x does not equal -1/2. So those are going to be our key numbers. We'll put them on our number line. Does -1/2 get an open or closed circle? Open because it's not equal to. What about 3? This one's closed because for the top, we go off of our inequality. Since it's less than or equal to, we put a closed circle. Now we can test our intervals. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. What's a number that's less than -1/2? -1. Let's plug in -1. I'm going to plug it into my simplified version here. If you want to plug it into the original, that's fine too. You can plug it into either one. So 3 minus -1 would be 4 over 1 minus 2 would be -1. Is this less than or equal to 0? Yeah, -4 would be less than 0. So it works over here. Let's just test the middle to be sure. We'll test all of our possibilities. What's a number in between -1/2 and 3? 0. So 3/1 is less than or equal to 0. Is 3 less than or equal to 0? Nope, the middle does not work. And then, just for fun, let's test our right side too. So the third interval over here, what's a number greater than 3? 4. So 3 minus 4 would be -1 over 1 plus 8 would be 9. Is -1/9 less than or equal to 0? Yes. So the right side works. So then here, our answer would be -infinity to -1/2 with a parentheses, and then bracket 3 to infinity. Whenever you have a fraction, you want to find your key numbers. So when the top equals 0, the denominator does not equal 0. Same thing if you had a polynomial. If you had something like a quadratic with x squared where you get 2 answers, if you have an inequality, those are your key numbers. You need to test your intervals. So anytime you get multiple answers, you want to test your intervals. Next, let's look at 20. So it gives us a point. It says plot the points, but we're not going to worry about plotting them. Let's find the distance, and we'll find the midpoint. So make sure for your test on Tuesday, you know the distance formula and the midpoint formula. So our distance formula is the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. I'm going to label my points x1, y1, x2, y2, and then plug them in. So 1 minus 9 squared plus 9 minus 1 squared. So this would be -8 squared plus 8 squared. So 64 plus 64, which would be 128. Can we simplify the square root of 128? So we have 2 and 64. What does the square root of 128 simplify to? 8 square root 2. Awesome. So that would be our distance. Next, let's find our midpoint. So the midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. So 9 plus 1 over 2 and 1 plus 9 over 2. We get 10 over 2, which would be 5. And then 10 over 2 is 5. So our midpoint is 5, 5. So again, make sure you know the distance formula and the midpoint formula. And just for extra practice, what point is the origin? What would be the coordinates of the origin? 0, 0. So if a question asked you, if it only gave you 1 point and said find the distance between this point and the origin 0, 0. Just make sure you know that for the test. So 24, we want to test for symmetry. To test for symmetry, let's just go through all three. We're going to test for the x-axis, the y-axis, and the origin. So when we test for x-axis symmetry, we want to plug in a negative into the y. So x times negative y is equal to 9. This would be negative xy equals 9. Is this the same thing as the original? No, so it's not x-axis. Let's test for y-axis. So we're going to plug a negative into the x. So negative xy is equal to 9. Is this the same as the original? Nope, not the same. Next, let's test for origin. Origin, we're going to plug into a negative into the x and the y. So negative x times negative y is equal to 9. Well, negative times a negative makes positive, so x times y is equal to 9. Is this the same as the original? Yeah, so we have symmetry on the origin. All right, next let's do 26. I want to find the center and the radius of a circle. What would our center be here? Awesome. 7, negative 5, perfect. And then what's our radius? What is it? 3/2, awesome. This is our squared, so you just have to take the square root of it. If it gave you the radius, make sure when you plug it in, you square it, because in our formula, it's r squared. So our formula for the circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to r squared. So you got to know your circle formula too. Lastly, let's look at 28. So it gives us a point and a line. It says write the slope-intercept form of the equation of a line through the given point and parallel to the given line. So if it's parallel, what do we know about the slopes? Same slope. So first thing we want to do is find the slope of the line that's given. How would we find the slope of this line? Put it into slope-intercept form so we can clearly identify the slope. So I'm going to move the x to the other side. So we get y equals negative x plus 15. What's our slope here? Negative 1. So when we plug that into our new equation, we're going to use the slope and the point. The rest of this line does not matter. We're only using it for the slope. So we're using the slope and the point that's given. So when we plug it in, you can either plug it into point slope form or slope intercept form to find b. Doesn't matter, use whatever way you like. I'm going to plug it into slope intercept form. So y equals mx plus b. So our y is 8, our m is negative 1, our x is negative 9 plus b. So 8 equals 9 plus b. Subtract 9, b is negative 1. So we plug that into our equation, we get y equals negative x, because our slope was negative 1, minus 1. Any questions there? Yes?
Wait, from the beginning when you did like to find that n equals negative 1, so even though there's two variables, you just...
So with the line that's given, you want to rearrange it to be y equals mx plus b. So that's why we moved the x to the other side. So then once it was in y equals mx plus b, whatever's in front of your x is your m. So if our line is perpendicular to the given line, what's our new slope going to be? Opposite reciprocal. So that means we change the sign and we flip it. So Kevin, what's our new slope? Positive 1. Perfect. Because negative 1 over 1 would just flip to positive 1 over 1, which is still just 1. So when we plug this in, we get, I'm going to plug it into y equals mx plus b again. So our y is 8 is equal to 1 times negative 9 plus b. So 8 equals negative 9 plus b. Add 9. 17 is equal to b. So we plug that in, we get y equals 1x, which would just be x plus 17.